Carbink has finally made its way into Pokemon Go, which is a pretty huge deal for PvP. In the main series games, Carbink is one of those low attack, high defense, McNothing Pokemon that you might have even forgotten about, which means in Pokemon Go, it's going to be downright terrifying. How good is Carbink? Looking at the PvPoke rankings here, it is number 1. Carbink, mind you, is a Rock Fairy type Pokemon with Rock and Fairy type attacks. No coverage against the Steel type Pokemon, which have historically always occupied the number 1 and number 2 slot. These Pokemon always beat Carbink, but Carbink is apparently so good that it takes the number 1 slot on PvPoke's ranking. So in this video, I'm going to talk about just how good Carbink is going to be in the Great League meta and how you can prepare for the new Carbink meta. So starting out with the basics here, Carbink is a Rock and Fairy dual type Pokemon with a really high stat product of 2,600, which is comparable but not as good as the Bastiodon. Why is Carbink number 1 then, and Bastiodon is far from number 1 on PvPoke? Well, Fairy type is an extremely good defensive type. If you checked out my Pokemon Go PvP types tier list, link up above and in the description, Fairy is rated as one of the best types in Pokemon Go. There's very little reason to not want to be a Fairy type Pokemon, because Fairy type's weaknesses are Poison and Steel, and we really don't see Poison and Steel type attacks that often in PvP. This means that Fairy type can only be a benefit for the Pokemon that receive it. When it comes to Carbink, it is a Fairy Rock type Pokemon. Rock types are known for being weak to fighting type damage. Our good friend Bastiodon over here is doubly weak to fighting type damage. Counter rips through this thing super easily. Carbink though is sub-Fairy, which resists fighting type attacks. So a Medicham does neutral damage to Carbink, while Carbink winds up to a super effective Moonblast. In fact, Carbink can counter Medicham. It can beat Medicham. This rock type Pokemon, using Rock Throw mind you, can defeat a Medicham, which is insane. So there's only benefits for Carbink being a Fairy type, very little if none as far as the drawbacks are concerned. When it comes to its move pool, we got Rock Throw and Tackle as fast move options, and in some cases Tackle may even be better than Rock Throw because it does neutral damage and it ramps up energy a little bit more quickly. So if you are up against a fighting type like Medicham, that matchup can go a lot more smoothly if you were to use the Tackle. And if you're up against like a flying type or a fire type Pokemon, they're not going to get through the Carbink, so you're not missing out by getting rid of the Rock Throw. That said, Rock Throw's chip damage can rack up in neutral matchups and can be important for some of Carbink's win conditions. As far as the charge moves go, we have Rock Slide, which is just always better than Stone Edge. In fact, it is arguably the best rock type charge move in the game. It comes early, it hits hard, so a slow Pokemon like Bastiodon is always winding up to these really big attacks. Carbink is reaching those attacks a little bit sooner. And then finally, we got Moonblast, and Moonblast is arguably the best Fairy type charge move in the game. It's got good damage per energy, and it has a debuff chance, so Carbink just has good moves. So if you think about the comparison to Bastiodon, less weaknesses than Bastiodon, arguably better resistances than Bastiodon, and then a much better moveset than Bastiodon. If you're curious about the third and final charge move, we got Power Gem, which is worse than Stone Edge, which is already worse than Rock Slide, so we're probably not going to see any Power Gem there. So what effect will this better Bastiodon have on the meta? Well, let me illustrate it for you. Here is a rough illustration of some Pokemon that you may see in the Open Great League meta, featuring our good friend Carbink. Carbink here is vulnerable to the Steel type Pokemon and to the Water type Pokemon. Unlike the Bastiodon though, we can hit these Water type Pokemon with Moonblast for solid neutral damage, so like another good thing for the Carbink. Carbink is really bad for fire and flying and ice type Pokemon. So these guys, they really don't appreciate Carbink existing. And because Carbink is number 1 on PvPoke, we're probably going to be seeing a lot of Carbink. Well, that's going to boost up Carbink's counters. We're probably going to see probably as much Steel type as usual because, I mean, these 3 suspects, you see them all over the place. And then boosting up the Water type Pokemon as well. So Carbink being everywhere and Carbink's counters being everywhere, I mean, what are these guys going to do? These don't appreciate Steel type Pokemon. They do not appreciate the Water type Pokemon. So we're probably going to be seeing a whole lot less of the flying type and fire type Pokemon. And in respect, that's going to boost up grass and fighting type Pokemon here because they no longer really have the flyers and the fire types to worry about, and they have good matchups against the water types, the steel types, and the Carbink for the most part, depending on the Pokemon, depending on the matchups. I know Alolan Sandslash here, mind you, these are the alt form Pokemon. I don't have Florks for the other ones, and I was too lazy to recolor them. Yeah, these guys are pretty good against the grass types, but you get the principle here, right? Another thing to note about Carbink too is that the fairy type is resistant and super effective against dark type Pokemon. When you got Sableye and the Umbreon here, they use normal and dark type attacks. Rock resists the normal. So that's kind of bad news for these guys. We'll probably still see these dark types in the meta because they do have good neutral matchups against a variety of things. But with less Ghost, especially less Sableye in the meta, you know, that's another plus for the fighting type Pokemon. So when it comes to what kind of teams we might see in the post-Carbink meta, well, I mean, double steel plus a fighting type is already a solid team. And then you also have grass hole teams now featuring Carbink. So Carbink with the double grass, or Carbink and a grass type and a fighting type. Those could be potent teams in the new age. As far as Pokemon that might get an extra special boost from the Carbink meta, I think Toxicroak is one such good Pokemon for that. Cofagrigus is another one. Cofagrigus is arguably the better ghost neutral Pokemon. It's just that the other ghost types that have existed in the meta have beaten it, such as the Sableye and the Trevenant. Trevenant got nerfed. Sableye is now having trouble with the Carbink here, so I think overall that could be good for the Cofagrigus as well. And then I guess Cofagrigus aside, this meta is also looking pretty good for Deoxys defense form. So the result is we may also see an increase in double counter user lines as well as an increase in like the double steel and the double grass. So that's just some ideas of what we might see more of in the post-Carbink meta. One big personal issue I do have with the Carbink right out of the gate is that it basically does Dedenne's whole job, but better. Dedenne is supposed to be this spicy anti-flyer fairy type Pokemon riding on the coattails of being a fairy type Pokemon that harasses the dark and the ghost type Pokemon and is good against the fighting types. Carbink just does that whole job better. Now, I mean, one thing that Dedenne has over Carbink is that it doesn't get trashed by the Registeel, but at the end of the day, I think the time has come, Niantic. We gotta buff Dedenne. Give it Nuzzle. Make it a Breaking Swipe clone, please. Another struggle with Carbink is that it is a big XL Pokemon, like basically level 50 Bastiodon looking Pokemon here. Now, there have been some early reports of charge move breakpoints on the Rock Throw that do look pretty appealing for a raid weighted Carbink. I haven't done a Carbink PvPIV deep dive yet, so hopefully it's not so bad when it comes to getting all that XL candy. To kind of amplify this issue a little bit though, when Carbink debuts, it will be exclusively available in raids. So you're going to have to spend raid passes to capture Carbink for a while, and we don't know if Carbink is going to be exclusively like raid exclusive, like you're never going to be able to catch one in the wild, or if it's just a temporary thing, and then after GoFest there could be Carbink in the wild. So we have a fear of missing out element and a direct monetization element with Carbink as well for this big XL Pokemon. So it is a little bit of a pain in the butt. Fortunately, the Carbink raids aren't limited to ticket holders, so if you do have some raid passes built up, you can go hog wild on them. Don't forget to Mega Evolve a Rock or a Fairy type Pokemon before taking on the Carbink raids, so you can take advantage of that bonus XL candy. And any Carbinks that you do get, and you start trading with friends, you know, make sure to trade at the distance so you can work on that XL. And then a final problem I have with Carbink is that I feel like it's going to push the Open Great League meta for Go Battle League into a RPS feeling kind of meta once again. They nerfed the Trevenant. I felt like our RPS days were kind of behind us, and now we're getting big old Carbink. To add to that, Carbink does fit the Grass Hole team pretty well too. So I don't know. Are we going to start seeing some more Grass Hole once again? It's been a while. Grasshole could be back on the menu, guys. When it comes to the Play Pokemon tournaments, though, the C6, Pick 3, multiple battle type tournaments, I don't think Carbink is going to be that big of a problem, though. So that is a little bit of an upside. It's definitely going to be good, and it is going to be different than what we currently have. I mean, like I said, it's kind of like the Dene, but a bit better. But I don't think it'll be so bad in C6 pick 3 because, you know, you get to know what your opponent's throwing at you. There are a lot of matchups that it's not doing so hot in. I mean, if you look at Wadaj's team from NAIC, yeah, Carbink is good against the Umbreon, it's good against the Charizard, but Wadaj was also bringing the Cresselia, the Toxicroak, the Quagsire. So in a sense, the teams that are already being brought to these tournaments are already fortified for the Carbink. Of course, I could be slightly mistaken. Maybe Carbink will descend everything into RPS hell once again, not just GBL. We'll have to see when we get there. At any rate, that's all I gotta say about Carbink right now. If you got any questions on this content, of course, comment below, let me know what's up, and I'll be happy to help you out. And if you enjoyed this kind of content, you want to see more like it, well, make sure to subscribe to SwagTips. SwagTips. I'd also like to give a special shout out to these Patreon supporters. If you want to support Swagman on Patreon, link in the description. So I think that's what we could expect to see from the